SaaS Therapy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of SaaS Therapy, the show where we help you save your most important business relationships, your customers. My name is Todd Kirk. I'm your host, and I'm joined by my co-host, Casey Trujillo. Casey, welcome to SaaS Therapy. We're so glad you're here.
Todd, that was disappointing. I'm going to be honest. You usually give
What?
me a title. You usually say,
Oh, you're right.
fantastic co-host, my handsome co-host. All I got was welcome. Now that was lame. So
You're right.
we are
Hold
honored.
on. No, well, the reason I did that is because honestly, I wanted to reserve that for our guest today, who deserves
Oh my gosh.
all
Okay.
of the.
There's plenty to go around. Yeah.
As you introduce our guest today, TK, people are going to love Kevin, and I'll let you do the bio on him. But go check out his, and again, you'll find out who he is. But his LinkedIn content is awesome. The little content pieces that he writes and is part of, hilarious. I cracked up laughing at these things. So I'm excited about our guest today, Todd. Who is it?
Well, we are joined today by Kevin Alster. Wow, see, I can't speak at all. Sorry, Kevin. We're by Kevin Alster, who is the head of Synthesia Academy. He's a traveling speaker. He specializes in connecting businesses with AI video technology to enhance workplace efficiency. He's got an awesome background, super efficient and wonderful human who I think is really cool. I've had a great time getting to know him over a couple of conversations. The real key thing that you got to know about Kevin is that he's super passionate about closing the gap between the information that we encounter and how we put it to work. So, Kevin, we're super pumped to have you. Welcome to SaaS Therapy.
Thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. I think I got both efficient and wonderful, which are two great adjectives. So thank you very much, Todd.
Well, Kevin, we want to get
that's Casey's jealous because I didn't give him.
Yeah, seriously, right? Kevin, we want to get to know you a little bit better. So we play a little game called This or That. It's 3 quick questions. You can only choose one of the answers. Right.
Okay.
And if you want to give a little clarity of why you chose your answer, we always appreciate that. That just helps the audience get to know you as an individual because they're only going to talk to you for about 40 minutes here. So we wanted them to get a little bit know more about you. So the first question, Instagram or Twitter?
Oh, is there a third option? Or do I got to pick one?
Okay, yeah, sure. You're the guest. Introduce the third option.
Well, I was going to say the reason I'm currently off Instagram because I was spending too much time on there, and Twitter for the exact same reason. I get news updates from there. So Twitter, formerly known as X. I'm big on LinkedIn. I found that is where I'm making really valuable connections in people that'll actually meet versus
there we go.
Twitter and Instagram. I'm probably not going to meet those people.
All right. That sounds
He's
good.
not in it. He's not in it for the likes. He's in it for the connections.
He's in it for the
cartwheel. Yes.
We got to get him a T-shirt that says that. Road trips or flying?
Flying. I'm trying to go farther distances. Grew up on the East Coast. There's not much happening there in the way of wildlife or great nature, despite having grown up near the Appalachian Mountains. So I'm trying to fly to places that have better nature.
All right. Anything on your list that you have upcoming or you want to go to?
Upcoming that I want to go to Sri Lanka.
Ooh.
Yeah, some big mountains out there, but also it's closer to the equator. I'm currently living in Copenhagen, Denmark, where it's just summer is about a snap of a finger and it's gone. So I want to go somewhere hot. I want to go somewhere with great geography and good food.
Let's see, great explanation. I love that part. I feel like I know you better. The last question is, and again, you might say none of the above, and we'll just end on that. But are you a Marvel or a DC fan?
Grew up reading DC, like what Marvel has done with the movies. I grew up on my favorite is Spider-Man. I don't know if that's your follow-up question, but I think it'd be great to wake up one day and suddenly have incredible powers and be jacked. So without any of the work.
Without any of the work. That's the key part.
Exactly. Hence the efficient, wonderful human. Also Spider-Man, Peter Parker.
That's right.
Or Miles Morales. Yep.
That's so good, Kevin. I think that's the, when I it doesn't surprise me, I guess, that you would say Spider-Man's your favorite, mostly because the idea of taking an ordinary human and giving them superpowers kind of out of the blue, but at the same time, not removing all of the things that make them human. Like
Exactly. Yes,
right.
exactly. And I love that you brought that up. You know, he had a humiliating and very formative set of teenage adolescent years, whether you're talking about Peter Parker, Miles Morales. And so that is key to the identity. So, you know, they weren't just born with it. They had to go through some of life's hardships as well.
Mm-hmm. You know, I think that's one of the things that I was most curious to talk to you about as we dive in here today. The fact that your background, you started in educating like young kids, from what I understand, and then moving
Yeah.
on to then like helping with enterprise L&D programs, and now you work specifically in L&D for a company that helps L&D scale and do other things like that. I'd be
Yes.
curious in your journey. What do you think has been probably the most consistent in your experience going through kind of the education world and the SaaS world and how they try to educate?
So I think for me, the biggest kind of thread through everything is trying to figure out how to learn in an entertaining way that is not through traditional lecture-based instruction. And that sounded like a bunch of buzzwords. So really teaching myself, being able to teach myself to do the things that I want to do to solve the problems that I want to solve. So I think, and a large part of that has been through either video or through mediated through some sort of instructional technology. And so when I was teaching, so I taught kindergarten for 4 years and coached for an extra 2. And also my first class of kids that I taught both kindergarten and first grade just graduated from high school last year, which is one of those objective facts that just says time has passed. And I'm very much grappling with that. But when I was teaching them, a lot of them were doing computer-based literacy programs. And they were doing that to supplement the skills that they weren't getting from whole class instruction. And I had that moment where I actually put the headphones on next to one of my favorite students and heard what they were doing, because they were on the same screen for 40 minutes and they were just picking. They were trying to put three letters into a word and read that out. But every time they picked it up, it made a sound. And they were just doing that for 40 minutes. So in my head, that was 40 minutes of wasted time per day with the student. So initially I went to school for instructional media with the intention that I would build the next big literacy app for kids. While I was there, I discovered a love for video. And then I realized that when we get to educational resources and how we deliver instruction through video and e-learning, a lot of the resources, you couldn't tell if they were built in the 1990s or if they were built in the 2010s. And so that shifted me into branded learning products where it's people are paying money to watch video-based courses, but they want to, again, learn without a traditional lecture style. So that's that way of learning through instructional media and video, but without that lecture basis, which a lot of education is based off of, even in the modern day. That's kind of the driving force behind, I guess, what I'm doing. And it just goes well with L&D. It goes well in corporate. It goes well in the classroom. Nobody wants to sit in front of a teacher anymore, unless that teacher is someone really famous.
Okay, Kevin, I got to ask you this question. And this is why I'm so excited to have you on the podcast, is I think you're a disruptor in the way that you think and the way that you approach challenges. So Todd and I work with a ton of SaaS vendors, and they'll consistently discuss with us, hey, we want to put together, some type of package to help people better adopt our AI, or we came out with this new module and it's game changer, but just people need to be aware of it. So help us in creating some education resources, etc.
Yes.
Without a doubt, every time the SaaS vendor says, well, what about instructor-led training? Like, just people love instructor-led training. And we're like, oh, so how many people attend your instructor-led trainings that you offer to your customers? Oh, a company will have like 20 people come. Well, how many employees are there? About 20,000. Oh, but they just love instructor-led training. So, Kevin, how do you help, whether it's the SaaS vendor, whether it's the corporate accounts, that they only hear from people that say, I want instructor-led training. And so they feel that they have to deliver that, versus giving things that people interact with every day, which is more of an e-learning type. How do you help people bridge that gap? Because they're just so stuck that I want this instructor-led training. Is it just we got to wait for those people to die out? And that I'm including myself because I'm bald and old. But how does this work? How do you get people to actually take e-learning serious and see that it's such a value versus the traditional instructor-led training, and we do this and we check mark the box?
Yeah, I think from my approach to instructor-led training as a solution, I think it's kind of the default of what everybody's used to. Because whenever you mention the word learning, there's a legacy with that word. Where what do you think of when people think of learning or learning and development? They often go back to some sort of lecture course where the expert sits at the front and the students sit opposite the instructor, and they're kind of just being passed information. And I think it's one of those approaches that we can't just leave behind because it's so stuck in everybody's head. But what we can often do is when I'm speaking to stakeholders, I say, great, that sounds like one solution that we might have. Let's set that off to the side, because even whether it's showing them the data that not, you have a really small percentage of people attending your trainings versus, the overall size of the company, or it's the research that shows that, people forget almost, within a few hours of attending a face-to-face training. I find that it's still stuck in people's heads, where really it's hard to get the right expert that's going to make something last. And so I think when approaching a stakeholder, it's important to always make sure that they start with the end in mind. And that's something that we hear often, where, what would it look like for someone who is in your target audience? What would their work look like as a result of this? What would you see them doing in 100 days? And being able to work backwards from that and saying, okay, face-to-face training is a solution, but then also we have all these other options. And e-learning is not just courses and resources, but it's also any number of smaller quick fixes. Maybe it's the solution sits within the community itself, where it's gathering people to share best practices, or it's developing even just a checklist or a job aid. We're always looking for like the lowest impact intervention when it comes to developing learning solutions. I think for me as well, something that no stakeholder can argue with is when you do the calculations of taking people away from their desk or people away from their computers, and you start calculating the man hours that it would take for a face-to-face training. Because even if it's just 20 employees that are attending these trainings, you say, okay, what is the cost of these 20 people attending a training? What is the number of work hours if we had to calculate that at a basic level? And you can show that back to the stakeholder and say, look, face-to-face training, it could be worth our time, but it costs this amount of dollars. And if the stakeholder is business savvy or business minded, face-to-face training is quickly put at, this is the really expensive intervention and it could be worth it, but look at all these other solutions that we have that could still target that particular problem, depending on the outcome that we're headed towards.
Kevin, I love that. I think one of the things that I see so often, especially with people who, have their master's in instructional design and kind of gone through the traditional education on this is what L&D is all about, is they focus so much on did people like the training? How many people consumed the training? And that's the wrong focus. The focus should be on did we enable them to change their behavior and do the thing that they needed to actually do? And
Yes.
adult learners, they don't care about, maybe so much, some do, I guess, about having a certification on their name, on their LinkedIn profile. What they really care about is, am I able to do my job better and help my company achieve their outcomes that they want to achieve? So I love that framework. For me, it's always been about it's about taking action. It's not just about learning. And so the thing that caught my attention, though, that you said at the start was that essentially, learning, the term learning, even e-learning itself, it conjures up this kind of this historical view that a lot of really struggle with. And as a result, I've come across people where they don't want to use the word training. They don't want to use the word learning. A lot of people hate the term LMS because it just is like, ugh, this is going to be awful.
Yes.
So it really sounds like there needs to be almost like a rebrand, a reset to help people understand that. Mm-hmm. And I'd be curious, how do you help people what are the phrases and the terminology that we could use to better help people realize that focus on change in behavior, adoption of key features, and achieving some sort of amazing outcome versus just like, do you want to sit through a course? I'd be curious. Where does your head go with that?
Yeah, so I think this is where I start to reach more in the field of, and I know that you just said we're leaving learning behind, but this is where I tend to ask more L&D professionals rather than leaning on customer education. But this is a big conversation in the learning and development world precisely for the reasons as you mentioned. So in terms of successful rebrands, I have two options that I'm going to pitch you. The first is this idea that in moving away from learning and lecture and online courses, it's more towards finding the solutions within the company itself. And so one possible rebrand is this idea of people and experience, where we are not coming up with a skills taxonomy necessarily and saying, what is the content that we can push towards you? But instead, we're looking for expertise, and we're thinking about how we bring that expertise to people. What is going to be the way that the people are going to connect with other people to provide the solution? So in one case, that could be an expert paired with a novice. So an expert data scientist paired with a novice data analyst to learn certain skills and kind of work over their shoulders and give them constant feedback. Another one is if you're able to build communities of practice where you might not have the solution within, or maybe you're introducing a new tool into a particular team or group. It's everybody is given hackathon style a particular problem to solve. They can use this tool to do it. They come up with their solution and they all share out what's working amongst themselves. So there's community and practice. So it's about people and experience, where it's connecting people with people or building these experiences that will expose them to innovative ideas and new approaches. The other one that I've seen land with a lot of success is the shift from learning to performance, where it's essentially the same job, but the eye is on, did we drive this particular outcome or not? And I think by focusing on performance or new behaviors, what that allows you to do is move away from thinking about the knowledge gap that you're trying to close, because you'll still have to close that knowledge gap in some way, but thinking about all the other ways that you might impact performance. So some ways that you might do that are not education related is you might look at the redesign the systems and processes that are out of date, or looking for ways to make sure that people have access to the right information, building as a product wiki or a single source of truth, where you're doing the change management to give people the tools to do their job, and you're affecting the systems and environment and processes, but you're not just focused on this knowledge gap and what traditional education tackles. So those are two for you. One is people and experience. The other is performance, having a performance mindset.
Solid, Kevin. Solid. I was talking with a recent SaaS vendor, and they were thinking about the end in mind, and they just didn't want to create content for content. And one of the things that I thought was fascinating, and I want to get your take on other success metrics that learning and development, customer education could be looking at. But I thought this was very interesting in what they're doing. Is the courses that they're creating, the education that they're creating is first, of course, to help the user adopt whatever feature or benefit they're looking at. But then they're sprinkling in little questions like, would you be interested in learning how you could connect this with QuickBooks? And if the user marks yes, it's creating a sales qualified lead for the CS person or the AE, depending on who handles it, to follow up and say, hey, in the education course, I noticed that you had, 100 users say that they're interested in how to do that and how to, integrate with QuickBase. Did you know we actually have an app for that? Oh, really? And it's now an upsell opportunity. But learning and development is actually being compensated for driving a sales qualified lead through their education. I thought, yes. Mind blown. Yes. Very cool. What are some other success metrics? Because usually L&D is like, how many people went to my academy? How many people took learning? How much content did I create? what are some other success metrics that you might suggest that you've seen, whether with your own organization or that you've seen other organizations implement, to really, really say, wow, our L&D team, our customer education team, whatever you're calling them, has had impact outside of just creating some content?
Oh man, this is a tricky question to answer because I think I find it's either very, very product specific or industry specific. I
Yeah,
can tell
fair.
you what I've done, what I've done in the past, because I'm very much aware that when it comes to learning and development initiatives, it always helps because the timelines for learning are so long. Um, it's difficult to quantify business impact in often in the timelines that the business wants to. And so what I've
Mm,
done in the past is for each one of my L&D initiatives, I grab onto somebody who is sits closer to the business as a business stakeholder. And when we plan out um, what the impact of learning and development will be, that is just one of the 5 touch points on driving performance or that new behavior, where if they're able to implement a successful outcome, then we're able to say that learning was influential in this, but did it have a specific impact? That's extremely hard to measure, and I'm not a big fan of looking at metrics from an LMS in order to determine if people are going to if that's going to lead to business impact upon completion of training. So I think that's pretty much table stakes for a learning and development measurement conversation. What I will say is that when it comes to metrics for a particular customer, if we're doing some sort of learning impact, I think a big question to answer to help determine what behaviors lead to success is meeting with a stakeholder and saying, what does this person 100 days later look like on their job, 300
mm,
days later, and looking at it from that perspective, so you have a listed set of behaviors to identify, because it's very difficult to say what the learning impact is. I'm trying to think of something specific. I think from a customer education perspective, I've looked at several metrics, particularly related to things like retention, where, if you have a North Star metric, like in our case, it's a video, where suppose we say that, people who make 3 videos in the first 30 days are going to are more likely to be retained. Those types of North Star metrics you can kind of ladder down from. But again, that comes from somebody who's directly tied to the business. And education is always a hypothesis for testing, did you impact that North Star metric? But again, having somebody who is not in education identify the specific behaviors they're looking for, that's always what I use as the target point for any educational resources, whether that's webinars or one-on-one meetings or workshops. Always looking for them to define that first.
Hmm. Yeah, Kevin, I think you're right. The objective, Casey and I just, funny enough, did a conversation around the same idea, even talking about laddering up and laddering down to find the right metrics for your organization. But what's interesting to me, at least, is the fact that so in traditional L&D, if you're working for a large enterprise, those behaviors are oftentimes very specific to your role and your industry, and they may not have, and it may be really complex to try to figure that out. Because I love your point about customer education, though, because it's a little bit more straightforward. If you're if you work in the SaaS world, there should be kind of a brilliant set of basics that you can identify that customers need to do to make sure that they stick around in the long term. And so, like your example about, if they do 3 videos in that first period, that is a really good indicator of retention. The part that I think is interesting is so many, the core thing for a lot of SaaS leaders who are working on their business is they're looking at and they're trying to understand the data to know what drives retention, the use of these specific features, or the engagement of these key stakeholders. But the interesting part there that I think sometimes gets left out is the delivery of real value. We end up looking at the engagement of key stakeholders and the usage of key features as kind of our best analog to
Yes.
identify if value is being delivered. But we have
Yes.
a hard time really measuring, did they achieve the value of that solution? And
Yeah.
I'm curious, how can organizations get better at not just identifying, did someone do an action in our system, but did that drive the result that they were hoping to achieve?
Oh man, I'm glad you're asking these questions because these are these are the tough questions to answer. I I think if you don't, I think a lot of it depends on what data are you able to capture and how mature
Mm,
are you with that data.
right.
I think when Synthesia was getting started out, of course we have our North Star metrics for retention and things that we're trying to target, but there were different levels of um, what we how customers were seeing value, particularly when it comes to video, because at the end of the day, Synthesia is a video product, and so I think within the first 90 days, um, they were more concerned about, is my video any good or not? And so do we have a
Mm,
metric for that? And so this was a tough metric to track because a lot of the teams that we work with happen to be in learning and development. They themselves are not tracking the efficacy of their videos. So they're not able to answer, are my videos good or are my videos any good or not? How do I make them better? So before we even get to having them talk about business impact, they need to establish this value metric that seemed a little bit elusive. And so one of the first things after developing a scaled onboarding program, which is your basic intro to Synthesia set of courses, which are knowledge around the key features, it was, how do we define this quality metric? And after watching thousands of videos, both AI video and just videos from across the web, it was about identifying these 4 key elements that we still use, called the FOCA framework, which is just 4 letters. It's foundation. Is it targeted towards an audience? Does it have an outcome? O, organization. Is it focused on a single idea? Content, which is about the basic design. Basic design principles boiled down into a customer-friendly language. And then A, action. Do the videos drive action? And if it has these 4 elements, then we're able to establish a common metric and a common language with customers to say, is this video of quality? Which is how they were defining value in the first 30, 90 days or so. And then anything beyond that, it's making sure that you have identified, is particularly with large enterprise, that you define a particular program and you're able to say, okay, at 90 days, we're going to check in. What are the behaviors that you're trying to target? Okay, if we make a video around that, can we keep on following up with you to establish if you're finding value out of that? But at the beginning, it was very just kind of up in the air because the client themselves are not tracking the quality of video, and there wasn't really a metric that we can grab for. So we, created our own as a way of getting the conversation started. But then once you build that trust, we're able to move more longitudinally and say, okay, in 90 days, did you hit your target that you need?
I know that Casey, normally I was expecting Casey to jump in really quick because I can see the gears turning in his head there, Kevin. But I love that so much. I call myself the Todd bot, so I try to restate what people say a lot of the time.
Please.
I'm going to do that here, Kevin. The thing that caught my attention, which is I think so practical for a lot of people to think through, is that when it comes to the idea of value identification, a lot of times that feels squishy. And what I love is that it sounds to me almost like you've intentionally or unintentionally discovered a cycle that you go through, which is there's a fuzzy metric. You need to go and then learn what are the impacts and the resources and the ideas that impact that metric, and then figure out how to educate the customer on how to achieve that or how to measure that themselves so that you can then go back to and identify the next step. So there's this cycle that you go through of value identification, value definition, and then value delivery. And I think that's really, really cool to think through. So whether that was intentional or not, it seems to me like there's this cycle that we need to go through to really make sure that we achieve the ends that we want to have.
For sure. I think two bits of context that I want to add there. And Casey, I saw you jump in, so I promise I'll be quick. But for context, when it comes to, in particular, the use of a video product, the only metrics that companies might have on hand is the number of work hours that go into the current workout hours that it takes for them to produce a certain volume of video. And so they have cost and they have time. But then everything else beyond that, a lot of the folks who are in our target customer segment, they're really just taking it. They're unfortunately, or mostly unfortunately, they're in the position of kind of taking in requests and outputting. And so everything that they see in their world was measured from, here's the time from when the request came, here is when the product was released, and here is around how much it cost to make each video. I don't think it's the best way to measure the impact of instruction, but that's kind of the context that they're working with. So if that's the context that they're working with, they need other ways to understand what value could look like. I think also, just for context, Synthesia has only been around with a video editing interface for about 4 years. And so what that means is people are only able to make AI videos essentially 3 years ago. And so the tech and the product that we have itself is still at the very beginning of its adoption curve, where when it first started out, it's just people who are used to making videos one way. Now they can make it another better, faster, cheaper way. And now this conversation is evolving because more people are making videos who weren't making videos before, which introduces a whole other set of challenges. So it's a constantly shifting goalpost, especially as the product matures as well.
Yeah, Kevin, it seems the biggest gap I see as I'm working with SaaS vendors is they roll out product features, 20, 30 new features every month, right? Microsoft, I remember them at the beginning. They had a website when they first introduced Microsoft 365 or Office 365 and going to the cloud. They had to have a website that said, here are the new features that are rolling out every month, because people just could not understand that, wait, I give you feedback and then you immediately update it and then I have it. That's crazy talk, right? People's solutions have evolved so quickly, but what's happened is L&D or customer education. Again, I say both because I've heard people correct me on both sides of call us L&D or call us customer education. But anyways, they're stuck in old ways. So they're designing out content, they're putting it into some type of SCORM package, then they're uploading it into the Academy. By the time they do that, what they just put up there is out of date, and they totally changed the interface. So I see this math not adding up, where SaaS vendors are adding all these new capabilities, all these new features. They want their customers to adopt it. The education piece to assist them in doing that is so far behind that nobody actually uses it. And then there's all these people on YouTube just creating content and saying, hey, here, do you want to know how to use this product? Here, I just created a channel and I'm showing you how to do it. They don't even belong to the company. Yes. So are we ripe for a disruption in L&D? Do we need to get people to change the way they're thinking about this? And if so, Kevin, what are 2 or 3 examples or old ways of thinking that we need to get people to change? And you can be honest here. This is a friendly podcast. Don't worry about any fear here.
I'm always wary of making huge predictions and being proved wrong tomorrow. Yeah.
It's okay. I was going to say Casey's a terrible therapist because he couldn't be. He just by telling you, oh, it's safe to say whatever you want and nobody's going to judge you.
It's a huge red flag, but I'll take it.
Yeah, you weren't even thinking it until he said it. Jeez, Casey,
for sure.
What a terrible therapist you are.
For sure. So the first thing that I'll mention is that I think that it's really difficult to unbundle our work from the titles that we have for the actual work we do and how that relates to the rest of the business. So like if you're a knowledge worker particular, and especially if you're an independent contributor, I think it's important that you have an awareness of your entire team's context or job. For example, if as a learning or an instructional designer, traditionally, your role meant that you were in charge of developing instructional resources and content, but really you're just as responsible for driving performance or your resources should lead customers to a desired outcome, not as much as other teams, but it pays to have a broader awareness about the impact of the work that you're doing. And I think in particular, when it comes to what I mean by that is that when it comes to using uh, particular tools for the jobs that we want them to do, we have to understand what outcome we're heading towards, and what we're actually using tools for. I think that a lot of just going back to my instructional design example, it's still based on this idea of, you're delivering, again, lecture-based courses, you're delivering educational resources, but really having an awareness of how else you could be making an impact, and how these other options you might have might lead to a particular outcome. That felt like a huge word salad. I got caught up in a couple other thoughts. I'll be honest. I'll just stop there
I
for a
love it.
second. But a big part of that is, I think, old ways of thinking is that your job is just to do one thing. So I want to reframe my example of an instructional designer. If I'm being at Synthesia Academy, I see my job as not just building educational resources and making sure that there's, I'm boosting retention, but also I'm thinking about things like lead gen. Where am I creating content that not only educates but also entertains folks, or like keeps folks informed? And so it's not just when I think of heading up an academy, I'm not just focused on, I'm handling onboarding and that's it, or I'm supposed to inform customers about new features and show them a context in which it's used, and that's it. I'm always thinking about what are all the different responsibilities that I have for that maybe didn't sit with me as a customer education person before, that I have to worry about now. I think that one was much more clear. So the second thing that I'll say is old ways of thinking versus new ways of thinking. I think there's, I'm thinking about your example, Casey, where you have people who aren't customers who are creating better resources than those who are in the customer education role. I think there's a way to lead into that, and it's making use of other people's resources because they are better and lead people towards a better outcome than your own resources. And so a lot of what we do at Synthesia Academy is not just lean on the instructional designer on my team to come up with our certification course, but if there's a better resource out there, you link to it and you give that person credit. And it's almost like you're looking always for, you might not always have the best answer, but there are other people who might be more expert in your product than you are. And it's figuring out how to connect to those people and how to bring their resource, if it is the better resource for what your customers are trying to do, into your academy, or make a connection in that way. So one, you might not always have the answer. And two, it's understanding that, your traditional role as a customer education person, it's not just about building instructional content. It's so much more. It's essentially treating your academy like its own product. You are the marketing team. You are the product team. You are your own customer education team if your academy is hard to use, or if you have a really intense product. But again, it's unbundling your role from what you traditionally used to do. And I'm also well aware that customer education is already a fairly new field. And so, releasing that old tradition as well, and being part of your own product.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that stuck out to me there that I think is really good, Kevin, is the idea of I'll say it like this, like deputizing your champions. So if there's all these like, so often I think the L&D professionals of the world feel like, well, I have to be professional, I have to be stoic, I have to be direct, I have to be clear, I have to be comprehensive. Yeah. Which basically all translates into being really boring and not human, and nobody wants to engage with you because you made things complex and dry and blah, right?
Yes.
Where if you focus on a more human approach and engaging the people who really are invested in you and figuring out how to empower them, that gets really, really cool, because not only does it give you the ability to scale and to reach and to react faster, but it also gives you the ability to like totally amplify what people are doing with your product, because those
Yes.
people may do things or learn things or share things that you had not thought of before. So that's really a cool thing to think about.
Yeah, and it's certainly nothing new when you shout out. I was, as you're explaining that, I was thinking about in the past 6 months, what we've really leaned on as part of our not just our content strategy, but our education strategy is providing meaningful channels for our customers to share out their success stories. Because I think there's a lot of I felt a lot of pressure when I was starting out Synthesia, when we were first building the academy, to come up with all the tutorials, all the resources, the certification, the ways of working, all the job aids that would go out to prospective customers. But then realized that we had some very enthusiastic clients who are willing to share not only their work, but also their workflow and processes, which was more contextualized to the business and what our clients were trying to achieve than anything that I could have come up with. And so that's a big part of what we're doing now is we have what are called Synthesia stories, which is highlighting a particular customer, but making sure that they come not only with a project, but they're able also to talk through their work and tell a story. Because there are some customers, I should also just say that there are some customers who are really enthusiastic who don't have maybe that are not able to educate people to a consistency that I would like others to learn from on Synthesia Academy. So it's about sourcing the right people, sharing the right stories, and knowing that it most likely comes from customers from externally rather than from internally, because we're in our own world altogether.
Mm. So cool. I think one of the things that is also really hard though is I know that you come from an L&D and a customer education background. I'd be curious, just as we move on here. There's I saw this meme the other day of a guy digging a ditch. The old meme of the construction workers where everybody's standing around and looking at the person in the ditch.
Yes.
And what's hard is in that context, it was people responsible for customer success, and they're all watching the CSM who is digging the ditch for customer success, right? Nobody else is actually helping. And I think, and for a lot of tech companies, there's this idea that like customer education metrics are important for customer education. They don't matter for the other rest parts of the business. Or customer success, that's just the CSM. They worry about renewal. No one else at the business really needs to think about renewal. And I'd be curious, when you think about the challenges that so many SaaS companies face with adoption, is the fact that not everyone in the company is invested in key ideas. And so maybe as we wrap up here, I'd be curious to get your take. How do you get the rest of the organization to care and get invested in driving like information and putting it to work, right? Or driving behavior, or getting some of these key things that maybe just your team cares about? How do we help the rest of the organization get invested in these ideas?
I can tell you the way, of course I have a lot of theories about this, but I really have one way that it works, one way that I've seen work, which is to create internal champions for the projects that are working and shout them out and build a lot, build a lot of FOMO around what the successful people are doing. And by that, I mean, in our case at Synthesia, it looks like a dedicated Slack channel just to whether that's to renewals or successful customer project, being able to shout out the person or people involved, shout out the dollar value that they contributed to, and then provide enough context about the story about what this person did. I know that's a very squishy answer, but I find that we don't do compared to companies that I've worked in the past where there's been some a customer success component. I think that customer success is the unsung heroes, and it's really difficult to show their work and how they're maintaining a relationship. And it's really about it's about recognition and incentivizing that in whatever works in your company's context. I'm sorry I don't have a more clever answer, but it really is about having internal marketing for what the different teams are doing, not just for awareness, but as a way to treat customer success like a revenue driving team. It's yeah. It's what you're saying is you're asking all the difficult questions, and I'm giving you just the best answer that I got at the moment. But internal marketing is what I see work at Synthesia, in terms of actually sharing out what is actually working and how you can attribute that to customer success.
That's awesome, Kevin. Thank you. I mean, I think like you're saying, the best that I've seen is there's an alignment between the different divisions. Customer success, they often get told, hey, here are our KPIs for the year. These are the things that we're trying to get our users to do more of. Great, got it. Customer education, this is what CS is going to try to do. Fantastic. Sales, this is what we need to focus on. So when we bring on a new deal, they know these are the benefits and the value that we're bringing to. And I often think that the three are not aligned because the right incentives, the right KPIs have not been expressed across all three. And so I like your approach in saying, okay, if we are aligned, then we have this Slack channel where we can talk about, hey, did you notice that? And then all of a sudden, everybody's seeing how they play a part of it, right? It was fascinating. One of the studies they did about the Golden State Warriors. So this is for people that love basketball. The Golden State Warriors, a professional basketball team. One of the things when Steve Kirk took over as coach, one of the things that he took from his days of playing for the San Antonio Spurs that won 4 championships is the amount of times that people touched the ball in a given possession. And the more touches that everyone on the team had, the more likelihood of success of that team. They went and evaluated all the top tier teams. The top tier teams actually pass a lot. And psychologically, what they found out was if I touch the ball, even if it's just for a second, and I pass it to Steph Curry, and Steph Curry is going to always shoot the ball, and I only shoot the ball 3 or 4 times in a game, the fact that I'm part of the possession makes me feel that I am part of the team. And so I love that aspect around the Slack channel. So that was very insightful, Kevin. Thank you for giving that to us.
No, thank you.
Kevin, you've been a wonderful guest, and I know that we threw a lot of probably weird curveballs at you today, Casey and I, because the reason we love doing this podcast is because we love to ask the hard questions that we struggle with to learn how to answer, and we want it to be real. So thank you for being patient with us as we went through this. You know,
For sure.
the show is SaaS therapy. And the last question that we always ask our guests, you know, this is a therapy session. We went through and we pulled back some difficult topics that maybe we didn't quite know how to answer. We explored things that we feel like we understand that maybe other people don't understand that we really wish they understood. But, you know, for every good therapy session, you have to have homework. And so
Yes,
give our listeners one item of homework after this conversation. What would that be?
yeah. I have a very particular axe to grind at the moment, and it's particular when it comes to one of the most used tools that we have in customer education, which is webinars. I think the pros of a webinar is it's a great tool for you to test out and experiment new content live with an audience. You can get real feedback on, is this content useful or not in the moment if you use polls and Q&A and all those things. My problem is with what people do with those webinar recordings after they have finished, because I think what I'm seeing as table stakes is you do a 45-minute webinar and then that goes up on a webinars page without chapters, without a description. It just goes up wholesale. And looking at metrics, if you're hosting on YouTube or another content management system, my homework for folks is to go back and look at the engagement across a webinar playback. And the reason I bring that up is that it's one of those things where I'm like, why are we still doing this in 2024? We're post-pandemic. People don't have time for these resources. Instead, look at the engagement across the full video, and then once you digest that number, have a good long hard think about how you're going to find the most useful nuggets and repackage that information into something that is useful. And you can use that in the form of tutorials. You can serve that up as individual resources. You can use that in email marketing. But webinar recordings are such a rich resource that I see get misused over and over and over again in customer education. And so, take a look at your engagement on the recording and I'm going to guess that you can use that a lot more usefully across your other channels and resources.
Kevin, I love it. So good. Time to get way more intentional about the type of content we produce, how it gets utilized, and how we can better focus on having it drive the outcomes that we want our customers to have. Kevin, You've been an awesome guest. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It was wonderful. Yeah.
SaaS Therapy is brought to you by Brainstorm, the SaaS platform for SaaS adoption. Learn more at brainstorminc.com.